We're going to our next lecture, and some people they hear voices, also when they're alone. And our next lecturer is an expert by experience. He heard voices and founded the first Hearing Voices Support Center. He will tell you his personal life story and how he now helps other people. Give him a big hand, Robin Timmers. Zet hem op, hè?
Hello, hello. Oh, whoa. Good morning, everybody. How are you doing? Third day of the International Week. You still got some energy left? Yeah? I see somebody nodding. I'm really curious who you all are. I'm going to tell all about who I am and my recovery story. But I like to make it personal and social, and I would like to get to know you a little bit too. So I was wondering where are you from? I heard some Dutch people talking. Who is from the Netherlands here? Ooh, a lot. Represent. I can see upstairs. Yeah, people from the Netherlands. But it's an international week. It's not just Dutch people. Otherwise, it would be the national week. So, where are you people from? You can shout out what country you're from. Egypt? Salam alaikum. Wow, gaaf. Egypt. I heard some country over here. South Africa. Woo, Sophie. Yeah. You come a long way. Welcome. It's really international. It's not just European, but all over the world. What other countries are here? Belgium. Allee, plezant. Ik zie jullie graag. England. Okay. Well, welcome to the Netherlands. Some other countries, maybe other people from Eastern Europe, maybe? Ukraine? Or no? Other, it's just Belgium, UK, South Africa, Egypt, and the Netherlands, or are there some other countries represented? Estonia? Oh, you're a bit shy. Oh, Estonia is here too. From the south of Europe, maybe? Or South America, North America? Okay, and I'm also really curious what your background is, what your profession or your study is. So it's health and social studies, so are there any social work students or teachers here? Woohoo, represent, yeah. Who, can I see some hands? Are there any experts by experience? Do you know that term, expert by experience? Do you have that abroad? Nurses, maybe? Yes, creative therapists? Yes, okay. Some other professions, I'm really curious. No? Okay, well. Yes, PMT in the house. I actually had a lot of PMT when I was admitted to a mental hospital, so I have some experience with that. So I'm going to get my clicker and I'm going to start the lecture. I'm glad we had some interaction, and I'm also glad I can see you guys. Let's see. So who am I? I am Robin Timmers. I'm from the Netherlands. I live in Arnhem. I'm 47 years old, and I'm a dad of 2 sons from 5 and 8 years old. And I work now about 12 years as an expert by experience. And an expert by experience is a new profession in the Netherlands. It's people with lived experience that have learned to use their own experiences and experiential knowledge, but also collective experiential knowledge to help others, to help other people who are dealing with problems, but also to collaborate with mental health care workers, for instance, to co-create recovery-oriented care. I will tell you a lot about my work later on. One of the main focuses of my work is at the Hearing Voices Support Center here in Nijmegen. That's a group of experts by experience. We all have experience with hearing voices, with struggling with them, but also with learning how to live with them. And we learned how to use those experiences. And we try to inform and support other people who hear voices, but also family and friends and mental health care workers. We'd like to be including all those people. And we do lots of different stuff that we'll tell you on later about. So in this lecture, or how do you call it, talk, I will tell my own personal story. And actually, I try to minimize the slides that I have. And in my story, I will add a lot of experiential knowledge about hearing voices, but also scientific knowledge and mental health care knowledge. In the Netherlands, there's a movement going on. I said the experts by experience are a new profession now, and experiential knowledge is now being recognized as one of the most important sources of knowledge, not just like it used to be scientific knowledge and mental health care knowledge, but also experiential knowledge. Maybe you're asking, what's he talking about? Experiential knowledge, what is that? That's what people learn, and everybody here has experiential knowledge. From day-to-day life, that you find out what helps you and what doesn't help you to cope with problems. What are triggers for you? What are ways of coping with difficult situations? That kind of thing is called experiential knowledge. And also, in a broader view, in the lifespan view, how do the problems I experience, mental problems for instance, relate to my life story? And I will tell you all about this in my own recovery story. So this story, my personal story, coincides eventually with the story of the Hearing Voices movement. This is a movement that started in the 80s in the Netherlands, and it's one of the earliest forms of the recovery movement. And then I'll talk about the Hearing Voices Support Center. So it will be more a narrative than a presentation with slides, I think. But after that, we can interact. You can ask questions or share experiences or ideas. And if necessary, I can pull out a slide to illustrate some stuff. Yeah, I think that's it. So I'm going to tell my own personal story. Let's see. 22 years ago, I was a student like most of you. I was walking around in this neighborhood. I was studying at the Radboud University, and I had a job at the neighbor's place here. It was a new brain imaging center they were starting, and I was working as a student assistant there. And things were going pretty well. I liked the study of psychology, and I was doing well with it. Like many students, I like to go out, and I love to make music, for instance. And I also developed an interest in spirituality and shamanism and Buddhism. And to be honest, I had a daily routine. After I was finished with everything, every night I would smoke weed, which in the Netherlands is kind of legal. And I was interested in also trying out other substances. So One day I wanted to do LSD, and I thought I prepared myself properly. I knew if I used LSD, I would have some unusual experiences. And, well, this trip brought along a lot of unusual experiences. I started hearing voices, I saw many visions, felt all kinds of things I didn't feel before. But normally, when you take an LSD trip, the next day everything goes back to normal and you go on with your life. But for me, it kept on going. For years and years, I kept on hearing voices and seeing visions and feeling unusual things. During this trip, it was at a festival, I felt something inside. Something wasn't feeling right within me. And I was thinking, what could that be? Maybe because my ex-girlfriend and me, we broke up a half year before. Was it that? No, it's not that. What is it? And then I started thinking about my mother. My mother, when I was very young, when I was 2 years old, she had a hemorrhage and she got half paralyzed. And yes, as a young, beautiful, intelligent woman, she was now how do you call it? Revalideren, recovering in the center with all kinds of old people, and she lost all her roles in life, and she developed also mental problems, and she got admitted in a psychiatric ward, and they gave her the diagnosis of bipolar disorder, so like manic depression, they called it back then. But I think it was a really understandable reaction to what happened to her in her life. Also because my dad and her got divorced, and there was issues about who's going to be the guardian of me and my brother. But I didn't know much about this when I was doing this trip, because I was really young. This happened when I was 2 to 4 years old. But what I did know was that my mother, when I was 4 years old, eventually ended her life. So this had a really big impact on us all in the family. And I was thinking about this during this trip, and I was thinking, did I have anything to do with her decision to end her life? And then I heard a voice for the first time, and it was a female voice. And she said, but you didn't kill her. And that was really strange. It was clearly not a thought of myself. It was a female voice I heard, and it was saying things I would never think in those terms. So that was really strange. And it was, by the way, an unknown voice. I didn't recognize the voices. For instance, the voice of a family or friend or somebody else's. After that, many other voices came, and I will tell you about that later on. What also happened was that I got in a kind of a trance, in prayer position, while I never prayed back then. And I saw a vision of a temple of big, temple of a kilometer high, white light into the sky. And this was a really clear, intense, meaningful spiritual experience. And I had a spiritual interest, but it was like from far away, and now I had a really intense experience, that kind of put my whole worldview inside out and upside down. So after this trip, I came home, and it was all pretty confusing, but I tried to go on with my life, with my study and my work. And I did this LSD trip with an American guy that was traveling the world, and he stayed at my place. And after a couple of days, he offered me Reiki. That's a spiritual kind of healing practice. And I said, well, okay, maybe it helps me to calm down a little bit. So he gave me that Reiki, and I reacted with a lot of crying and spasms. And the next day, he went on his travels, and at night, the spasms came back and the crying too. After that, it was really strange, my whole life was changed. And the voices that I heard, in the beginning, they were kind of neutral, most of the time they were of unfamiliar voices, and I heard the voices inside my head. Later on, I would also hear voices from outside my head. It's like actually a person talking somewhere. You really have to check, is that a voice that I heard or is it a person? But in the beginning, it was inside my head. And after a couple of weeks, they started getting really negative. They kind of bullying me, and they were saying there was something wrong with my soul, or I was about to lose my soul, and I really panicked. You know, it's like an existential panic, and yeah, that's what led to my first crisis. Yeah, it was a really difficult time. I've been walking around in the nature area, the Veluwe here, days and nights in a row. I was really confused, and when I came back home, my roommates, my housemates, they called the physician. He came and he said, "Well, you have a psychosis. Here is Haldol. That's an antipsychotic." Yeah, and this antipsychotic was the first of a long row of different medications in different dosages. And the idea is that it's supposed to suppress voices or weird beliefs that they call delusions. Yeah, but they also have a lot of side effects always. And for me, throughout the years, I've used more than 1 kilogram of antipsychotics, and the voices and visions never went away of this medication. There's a group, like 1/3 of the people that use those antipsychotics, the voices go away. 1/3, it goes to the background, and with 1/3, there's no change. So I've been using a lot of antipsychotics, but it didn't help with these voices. But it does have really severe side effects. It's really difficult to focus, pay attention to things. It's really difficult to think clearly and make your decisions clearly. It's really difficult to feel your emotions. So for your mental capacity to cope with things is actually, I experienced it as being undermined with antipsychotics. And physically, it has a lot of adverse effects. You get fatter. You can have a sugar disease. You get from these like tremors with your motoric system. You can have cholesterol problems. So yeah, actually, the people who got diagnosed with psychosis and later on schizophrenia, that used their antipsychotics for the rest of their lives, because that was the predict back in the day, they die 15 years earlier than the rest of the people. And they used to think, oh, that's because of schizophrenia, the brain disease, but it is actually of the long-term use of antipsychotics combined with lifestyle things like eating and moving healthy and smoking. But anyway, I was introduced to these medicines, and this first year was really difficult. I was coping with these voices and visions and odd feelings, but also with all these side effects. And I tried to work and study sometimes, but yeah, that really didn't work out. And actually, I started to socially isolate myself because it was really difficult to interact with people and with voices at the same time. You have to do a kind of multitasking, and I actually got really paranoid because of the voices. So I socially isolated myself, and looking back, I didn't do the things I like to do. I hardly listened to music or played music or hang out with my friends or go into nature. And I wasn't really taking good care of myself. And looking back, yeah, I was busy with these voices and visions and the questions I had about it night and day. But looking back, as I did nothing else, I gave a lot of space to those voices. And later on, I learned if I go and do things that I really like and that are meaningful to me, the voice goes to the background. But I didn't find that out yet. It was really a struggle for 1 year at home. Sometimes I had a positive spiritual experience with the voices or the visions, like a voice that was calming me down and helping me, or sometimes I heard beautiful music out of nowhere. But also really dark things, voices that tell me to kill myself, or like horrific imagery that I saw. Yeah, and low point was that I was pretty suicidal at one point that year. So after a while, my mental health care worker started asking, "Do you want to be admitted to a mental hospital?" And I said, "Okay, let's try it." And I was there 1 week, and after a week, I had something like, "Well, this is not for me. I'm going home." And it was voluntarily, so I just could go home. A month later, I was admitted again, and I wanted to go home after a week, but they said, "No, we're afraid you'll become homeless. You will go to the forced, locked ward of the mental health care institute." So I've been locked up for a year, and it really felt like a prison to me. And also forced medication. So you get an injection with antipsychotics, and then afterwards you can do nothing. You cannot stand on your 2 feet. You just crash and become a zombie. And also one time I was put in the isolation cell or separation room. And normally in the Netherlands they say if you form a danger to yourself or to others, then you can use forced treatment. But I wasn't really being a danger to anybody, but I was really saying to those people, I was actually screaming, that I thought it was against human rights what was happening there. And when you do something like that at a Rage Against the Machine concert, and you scream, "Fuck you, I won't do what you told me," with thousands of people, it's okay, and you come, it's no problem. But if you do that in a locked ward, you get thrown in the isolation cell. Now, back then, the idea was, and it's a really dominant view in psychiatry, and it's also spread to the wider society, is that hearing voices is a sign of psychosis and schizophrenia. There used to be some forms of hearing voices that was actually right away schizophrenia diagnosis. And the idea was that you have a lifelong mental or biological disease. And they told people, well, maybe you should forget about living self-sufficiently or having a partner and kids or work or study. You have to rethink your aspirations in life. So you were actually, I really felt like being, how do you call it? Subscribed as a second-rate person. And with no rights at all, especially in the isolation cell, is probably difficult for you to understand, but you have zero rights, nothing, not even your own clothes, or you're completely dependent. I think you have less rights than most people who are in jail because of crimes, you know. Yeah. So, and the idea of schizophrenia was a lifelong disease, but the idea was also not to talk about your experiences, because you could decompose, and also not talk about traumatic events in your life, because you could go into a crisis as well. So the idea was, don't talk about it, use your medication, and medication, the idea was to remove the voices. So there was no room to talk about the voices, and there was no room to together find out what is the best way to handle this situation with the voices. And actually, when there was an official treatment plan meeting, and they asked, "Do you hear voices?" I said no, because I wanted to go away, otherwise I would stay even longer and get more medication. So it was unsafe to share these experiences. Yeah. Now, later on, I got to a voluntary ward, open ward, and they decided, well, you don't follow the rules here, you can go home. So I was actually pretty happy, and I went home. And in the meanwhile, I had a relationship with a woman that I've met at this mental institution, and we got engaged, and we decided to live together, and we had like a contract of living together there. But she experienced a crisis, and she was admitted to the mental hospital, and they evacuated, or how do you call it, cleaned the house altogether. So it's kind of funny that the mental health care first locked me up for a year, because they were afraid that I would become homeless. After a couple of years, I would become homeless because of the mental health care. And when I asked them, can I be admitted, they say no, because you don't follow the rules. So I was homeless for a couple of months, and eventually, when my father also mediated, I got to my last admission, a voluntary admission, and that's really when my recovery started. During this admission, I really started to think, how can I handle these voices? There's such a big problem in my life. And I've developed a way, and looking back, I really have to thank one social nurse that I met a couple of years before, when I was still in the locked ward. He started talking with me like a fellow person, and like, hey, Robin, how you doing? I'm doing this and that, and what are you doing? Yeah, I'm not doing too well. I hear all these voices, I told him. And he asked me, what are they saying? So I started listening, and I told him what the voices were saying at that moment. And he asked me, can't you talk back to them? And I said, no, I don't know how. I've been screaming out loud to these voices and talking out loud, but I don't know how to talk with them inside. And I remember that I was in my bed that night and looking for my own voice, and I couldn't find it. It was, for years, voices inside my head talking about my most personal thoughts and feelings in a negative way. During that time, I also started to view the voices as kind of negative spiritual beings that were harassing me, that were bullying me. So I decided to pray a lot and ask the spiritual good guys to help deal with the spiritual bad guys. And I think this helped me a lot spiritually, and gave me a hope and trust that things could become all right again. But when you pray a lot, you start actually talking inside. And after a while, I noticed, hey, I can speak my thoughts inside, and I can actually hear them. So I discovered finally my inner voice. And doing that voluntary admission a couple of years later, I really started using my own inner voice to cope with the voices that I heard. So I could talk back to them. I could try to, how do you call it, be assertive, tell them when I don't like what they say, or ask them to be friendly. Or if they are friendly, I could say, hey, thank you for that remark. And also, speaking my thoughts inside gave me grip on my own thoughts and feelings in my head again. So I could easier make my own decisions. And when I heard a negative voice, I could counterbalance it with a positive thought of my own. And I also noticed that I could block these other voices out with my own inner voice. I didn't hear them when I was talking inside. So this helped me a lot, and what helped me maybe even more, I think one of the most important changes in my recovery was that I started to change the relationship with myself. And with my inner voice, for instance, I started talking a lot with myself, and when I was afraid, tried to soothe me and talk courage into me and try to cheer me up. So I would talk with myself inside like I would talk to a best friend. For instance, like, hey, Robin, how you doing? Yeah, these voices are telling they're out to get me. Don't worry, you're safe and you're all right. You can just do what you want. In a way, similar like that. yeah, so I think becoming my own best friend is one of the most important decisions in my life, because I'm the only one who is with me throughout the years as a student, in isolation cell, being homeless, and later in my recovery. And I really started try to take care of my own mental health. For instance, feeling, how do you call it, put the finger on my own pulse as to check how am I feeling. Am I doing all right? Okay, what can I do to keep it going all right? Or what can other people do? And if I'm not doing all right, what can I do to make myself feel a little bit better and not go towards a crisis? So for years I've been working in that way, and in the Dutch we call it a signal plan. But it was actually a way of life, and it was really necessary because, yeah, I would be overwhelmed with paranoia and these voices still regularly in the beginning. There were some other changes during that last admission in a voluntary ward, and that was that I quit smoking weed, which helped make my head a little bit clear. And I found some medication that didn't have much side effects. If I used it before I went to sleep, during the day I was pretty clear, and I could experience some happiness even sometimes. And yeah, it did have side effects. I got diabetes from it, for instance, but relatively functioning day to day, it was good. The voices didn't go away, but the fear and the paranoia was a little bit damped, so it gave space for me to think and do things in life again. And another important change was that I decided, hey, I think I can rebuild my life. With this diagnosis of schizophrenia, I was like, you know, seen as like this broken person that cannot do anything anymore, and starting to believe I could actually rebuild my life. That's a really important change. So the years after that, with small steps, I tried to rebuild my life from more freer wards towards assisted living. I don't know if you have that in your country, but it's like supported living space at the organization where I work now, by the way. And after a couple of years, self-sufficient living with some support, and then after that, no more support and treatment at all, and living my own life. And this in the years in course of 7 years, so with a lot of small steps. Also, reconnecting with my friends and family. For years I didn't have much contact with them, so reconnecting with them and making new friends. And also doing voluntary work. And actually, I think, how do you call it, the sting of a bee, this point, when it hits you, and you can pull it out. I don't know, is it the sting? The sting of the crisis that I had, I think, was the idea that there's something wrong with me. Those voices have been telling that for years towards me. But also psychiatry has been telling that to me. And I've been really trying to coach myself, hey Robin, you're okay, and you can do meaningful stuff in your life, you can do fun stuff in life. So I started doing voluntary work for instance, for homeless people, for refugees. And after that it became my thing to organize benefit parties for good causes. So we had bands and DJs and belly dancers and poets and sometimes a party for 20 people and sometimes for 1,500 people. It was a really nice time in my life that I met a lot of people who accepted me and appreciated me as Robin and didn't see me as a psychiatric patient or schizophrenic. So this really helped me to recover from that. And yeah. So after a couple of years, I was thinking maybe I could pick up my study psychology again about hearing voices. I had a lot of experience by now. So I did that in my own time. I went to university. I didn't have money to pay the full college fee. But I wrote a thesis, bachelor thesis, about hearing voices and brain imaging research. And during that time was the first World Hearing Voices Congress in the Netherlands. And I asked people, can I go there? I'll write a report about it, and they gave me money to attend. And I expected all kinds of professors and researchers, and they were there. But actually every day started with experts by experience telling their own personal stories, really powerful stories of their struggles in life, during childhood, with the voices in psychiatry, and also their critical ideas how psychiatry can become more humane. So that was really inspiring, and it was just new in the Netherlands that there were, I discovered it for the first time, that there are such things as experts by experience and self-help groups. This congress was organized by the Hearing Voices movement. And I'm going to switch a little from my own personal story to the Hearing Voices movement. The Hearing Voices movement started in the 80s with a professor called Marius Romme. And in the 80s it was just like I described earlier on. They thought hearing voices, schizophrenia, medication, don't talk about it. And he had this patient who was pretty critical. And she said to him, I want you to help me understand these voices and cope with them. And he had to admit, I don't know how to help you. I know how to treat people with schizophrenia, but I don't know how to help you cope with these voices. I've never learned it. So he gave her a book that was more positive about hearing voices, and that was helpful. And he introduced her to other people who heard voices, and he just sat back and watched what happened. And they had a lot of mutual understanding. In the Netherlands we say, with half a word, they understood each other, and they used really different language than he was used to use. And that helped them a lot. And from scientific literature, Marius Romme found out, hey, it's actually a lot of people hear voices. So they used to think hearing voices is a symptom of schizophrenia. That's 0.5% of the world population. But actually 13% of the world population has experience with voices. That's like 1 in 8 people. Chances are that some of you have already experienced voices or will experience voices. And that most of these people, they don't have mental problems with it. They don't get a diagnosis. They don't get a treatment. It's just part of their life. Because actually since the dawn of mankind, people have been hearing voices and seeing visions, and it's been part of their spirituality and their cultural traditions. So, for instance, Jesus, Buddha, Mohammed, Moses, they all heard voices. And in a lot of religions and indigenous cultures, it's a really important part of their beliefs and experiences. So Marius Romme thought like, hey, if there are so many voice hearers outside, let's go to national television, talk about it, and ask people to call. And back then there were 2 channels in the Netherlands. Not like now, like 50 channels, but 2 channels, and the whole of the Netherlands watched those 2 channels. So a lot of people watched, and they thought, now maybe 30 people will react. But there were 700 people that reacted, and a lot of them heard voices. Some of them had a diagnosis and mental problems with it, but a lot didn't have them. And they invited them to create a congress with 4 people who hear voices, and by people who hear voices. And it was really revolutionary in the 80s. The whole recovery movement is starting 20 years later, you know. And with these people who heard voices, they started interviewing them. And that's where Sandra Asher comes into the story. I will show a picture of them. Sandra Asher is the partner of Marius Romme, and she was a journalist, like Sander. And she had really different questions to ask to those people who heard voices, because she was interested in their life stories and interested in their experiences. How many voices do you hear? Are they familiar to you? Are they unfamiliar to you? Do you hear them outside or inside your head? What do those voices say? When are they there and when aren't they there? And when do they become negative or when do they become positive? And they made this interview together with the voice hearers called the Maastricht interview. And it helped the voice hearers a lot to get insight into their own experiences, but also to communicate to others what they're actually experiencing, because it's been such a personal experience, almost like a secret because of the big stigma on it. So they made this Maastricht interview, and they found out actually that like most of these people had traumatic events in their lives, and that these voices often relate to those traumatic events, to these social problems, either literally or figuratively or symbolically. So when they were telling this at the World Hearing Voices Congress, and I'll go back to my original story, then I had an insight like, wait a minute, yes, of course. The first voice I heard was talking about my mother, and it's really a big traumatic event in my life, and it's really a different way of viewing voices, not as like there's something wrong with your brain and genes and that's why you have this disease called schizophrenia. It's like, hey, you have had difficult life experiences and it's understandable that you start hearing voices who talk about them. Yeah, so this was really a big insight. And also, like I said, that hearing voices is a very common human experience. The Hearing Voices movement sees it as a variation instead of a symptom. It's like homosexuality in the 80s. It was a symptom in the DSM. It was like a symptom of a mental disorder, and that's been emancipated out of the DSM. And left-handedness is another example. It used to be in the Netherlands, if you were left-handed, they will punch it out with a stick because you were supposed to be right-handed. So in the same way, the Hearing Voices movement looks at hearing voices and seeing visions as a part of the mental diversity, as a variation, and not a priori as a symptom. So I came back from this congress really excited. World opened up for me, and I got this thesis done, and I went on with my study psychology, but there was nothing about this. All I had to do was learn the DSM by heart, and there was nothing about hearing voices, the role of trauma, expertise by experience. And around that time, the first courses became available about expertise by experience, about recovery-oriented care. So I decided to develop myself as an expert by experience. And first, I did a lot of small jobs, and then for a year I worked in Utrecht, tried to help lessen the use of force in psychiatry. Actually to try to get the isolation cell out of psychiatry, and it was really disappointing because the people on those wards, they weren't willing to change. They didn't want to change their policy, and they weren't open to collaborating with an expert by experience. And sometimes, you know, I saw a guy who was really agitated, and I wanted to talk with them, and they say, no, you cannot talk with them. And then half an hour later, with 8 people, they grab him and put him in the isolation cell for days. And I really think this could have been prevented with just a talk from person to person. And especially as an expert by experience, we have a different relationship to the people that we're trying to support. A lot of people who come into care or mental health care, they're seen as a patient or a client that gets help from an official mental health care workers. So there's this a patient care supporter relationship. But for me, when I relate to other voice hearers, it's just I'm a fellow voice hearer with common experiences, and we struggle with the common themes. So we have a different relationship, and that really opens the conversation a lot. People often tell for the first time about their experiences with the voices, but also for the first time they talk about what they experienced in psychiatry, in the isolation cell, for instance. So peer support in general and the support by experts by experience really give a value and a space where people can be themselves and can openly talk about what's important to them. Yeah. So when I was working at those wards to try to reduce the use of isolation cells, the United Nations was making, maybe you know this, a declaration of the rights of people with disability, or people who are being disabled. Maybe it's a better term. And I don't know if you're aware of it, but it's a really important declaration. It describes the rights that everybody has to health and to care. And one of the things they said is like use of force in care is a crime against humanity. It's a human rights violation. It's a form of torture. You cannot do that. But when I informed my colleagues at the closed ward, they weren't really happy about that. But yeah, this is really a big development, and also in the Hearing Voices movement, human rights have been an important theme. For instance, the right to have your own religion and your own beliefs. It used to be that if you hear voices, you have already a symptom, you have a hallucination. When you have a spiritual explanation, you have another system because you're delusional. You know, only the view of the psychiatrist, that was back in the day the only right view. If you differ from that, then you have a lack of insight and often, you know, a delusion. But we try to emancipate both hearing voices, but also create the space for people to give their own meaning to their experiences. And it can be a psychiatric meaning, but it can also be a spiritual meaning, or a psychological meaning that it's related to traumatic events. So we're really trying to get up and stand up for that right. But I was really disappointed with this job trying to reduce isolation cells. So in the meanwhile, we're trying to start up a Hearing Voices Support Center in Nijmegen to put into practice all those ideas from the Hearing Voices movement. So this started in 2012, and we got some funding to develop a course about hearing voices, both for voice hearers, family and friends of voice hearers, and for mental health care workers. And that's a really special situation every time, because most of the time you have like a recovery course for patients and a training for professionals and psychoeducation for family and friends. But here everybody's in the same group. Everybody's invited to share their life stories and share experiences with mental difficulties, and also share experiences with stigma and discrimination. Maybe it's because you hear voices, you're being stigmatized, but maybe because you're a woman, or maybe because you have a different gender, or that you have a different skin color or sexual identity. Many people have experience with stigma and discrimination. So we share a lot in these courses, and we also give a lot of information about what is voice hearing, how can you cope with it, how can you support somebody that hears voices. And everybody makes their own story and their own plan. So this can be a recovery story and a recovery plan. But it can also, if you join this course, it can be like, how do you call it? I don't know the English word, but you can gather information from your professional point of view about hearing voices and make a plan how you put it into work, trying to support voice hearers and to collaborate with other expertises. And this was really a special situation every time those course, because people share so much and because it's a safe, free space. Yeah, we get to know each other really well in a short time, and lots of the time people don't want to finish the course, they want to keep on having contact, and sometimes we actually do. And also people tell their stories in their own way. We really try to encourage that. So last time we had poetry, we had use of film and video, we had live music, we had paintings, and it really gives an opportunity to express yourself in different ways, also non-verbally. So yeah, my work at the Hearing Voices movement, in the course, but also in the self-help group or individual support, is like meaningful meeting, condensation of meaningful meeting. Like it all of a sudden is extra essential what you're talking about. So it's for me also a way to use all those experiences that I've got, both the negative ones and the positive ones, to try and help other people. So for me, it's really a way to give meaning to my life and experience as well. I go back a little, because at the start of the Hearing Voices Support Center, I also, in my own recovery, started tapering of the antipsychotics. And that was really taboo back then. But fortunately, by now in the Netherlands, it's become more and more normal to taper off medication. And this is something really tricky, because of course, you have to do everything on your own strength when you have less medication or no medication, but you also have the withdrawal effects. And these withdrawal effects alone, if you quit, if any of you start taking antipsychotics for 3 months and you quit, chances are you get into a psychosis, straight up because of the withdrawal effects. So you have to be really careful in small steps, small dosages, and yeah, it took me about 4 years to taper off the medication. And another important thing in my recovery story is that in the Hearing Voices movement, it's actually very normal to talk with voices. I used it myself, and many voice hearers throughout the ages, they talk with their voices. But there's also a way of supporting voice hearers that, for instance, you talk with the voices of a voice hearer and try to create a respectful, meaningful conversation. And these talks, they have really surprising outcomes. Many times when people who are really negative voices that all the time are saying, you're worthless, you gotta kill yourself. If you finally have a meaningful conversation with those voices, they say, we actually want to help you, but we say the opposite of what we want. So for me, I've been, when somebody started talking with my voices, I could finally explain to the voices what I felt and what I think, and the voices could explain themselves. And I found out that they actually want to help me overcome my fears. So they would say all kinds of scary things to try and provoke me to overcome my fears. And for years, when they said the scary things, I really got scared. But now I use it as a tool, kind of like sparring in Kung Fu, to overcome my fears. Or like they say, hey, are you going to be letting us confusing you? Or are you going to stay focused on what you want? Do you do what other people or what we tell you to do? Or do you do what you want to do? And when I look at it that way, I can use the voices in a positive way, so I can translate their meaning. After that talk, I actually asked a friend of mine to talk with my voices, and when she went away, I talked for hours with these voices in my head, and it was really a big change, because after that they were much more considerate of me and they were much more friendlier, and even when they said something negative, I could translate it into something positive. And the relationship really changed from a couple of lots of bullies, actually, of which I was the victim, to a kind of collaboration and friendship. And I've been working this way with voice hearers the last few years, and time again, these kind of things come out of it. So psychiatry for years has been against the voices. They wanted to remove them with antipsychotics. And the result was that the voices really became negative. They felt threatened by it, you know. So for me, when I work with the voice here, I have to create a safe, free space for us both to be ourselves and to talk openly, but also create a safe, free space for their voices so that they feel at ease and they are willing to join the conversation. Yeah. One of the nice things last 10 years was also that we had the second World Hearing Voices Congress in the Netherlands. It's every day in a different country, but the second time in the Netherlands. We made a manifesto about the human rights of voice hearers. And I was honored to present it to a human rights rapporteur from the United Nations. And he totally agreed with it. And we started dancing to Bob Marley afterwards, Get Up, Stand Up. It was really a beautiful moment because it said all these things I said earlier about you have the right to be free of forced psychiatry, of the right to choose your own support or the right to give your own meaning. And yeah, it was a circle round for me because I was locked up in the isolation cell because I was saying it was a crime against human rights, and now here was the human rights reporter saying, yeah, that's true actually. So it was really empowering for me. And also, yeah, throughout my recovery and also now working as an expert by experience, it has really been about changing relationships, changing the relationship with the voices, changing the relationship also with the mental health care workers, changing the relationship with myself and my family and friends. So yeah, and the most important thing, the starting point, is really creating this safe, free space where you can be yourself and where there's room to tell your story and tell openly about your struggles, but also about your talents and passions and qualities and what you want in life, not what other people say you can or not can do, but where you want to go into life and talk about what you need for that. So I think, I don't know the time, we have like 15 minutes. Oh, that's pretty good. We have time for interaction. This was my story up to now. If anyone has questions or want to share an experience. We have a special thing. We can just throw this around. Is this okay? If I throw it to you? Can you help in the front row too? Oi! Yeah.
Okay.
In the black thing, you can talk.
Okay. Oh wow. Okay. How many voices did you hear?
That's a good question. Voice hearing is for every voice hearer different. Some people hear the same voices, like 3 or 4, that say the same things every time. And for me, it was really changing all the time. So every day I heard new voices, and sometimes some voices came back for a while. But because it was changing all the time throughout the years, I've heard hundreds of different voices, but like 30 or something, they came back more often. So that's it for me, but a lot of voice hearers have different experiences.
And are you free of the voices now, or are you still experiencing them?
Good question. Yeah, actually, I discovered after a while that when I'm busy doing things that are meaningful to me or that are fun or useful, when I'm really focused on other things, there's no room for the voices inside my head. So I experienced it throughout the years that the voices became less and less, but every time I was relaxing, they would come right away, you know. But also when I learned more ways to take care of my own mental health, and especially ways to create a kind of emotional calmth and bodily relaxation, then it became more quiet as well. I think the emotional turmoil is like the fuel for the voices. So when there's inner calmth, there's less voices, but also the function of the voices why they came into my life, to get overcome my fears or the questions I had about spirituality, the relationship with trauma in my life. I kind of worked through it, so there was no need anymore, I think, for the voices to tell me, hey, this and that is playing in your life, you need to do something about it. So all these reasons together, I think for me it was kind of a surprise that last year it became actually pretty silent. Once in a while, in a stressful period, or when I take a long time to meditate, for instance, then the voices would come. But it's actually a surprise, because I thought I would hear voices the rest of my life, but it's really a little bit nowadays.
Okay, thank you.
Welcome. Thank you for the question.
Anyone
Any other questions?
here too.
Yeah. We
Yes.
go, after you, we go to the online, so we give them an opportunity as well. So yes, please.
Hi, thank you for your story. I have a question. I'm a social worker in Belgium, and I work in a center where people can come to drink coffee and talk if they want to talk about something in their lives. And there is a visitor, a woman, who hears voices, and like you said, she always tells me that these voices are very negative about her. Every night they tell her that they will go away, and every morning they are back. And also when she has to make a decision, these voices tell her she's worthless, and they tell her what to do. But my question is, do you have advice for social workers how to help her to help herself with these experiences and negative talks?
Yeah, a good question. And by your question, I also noticed that you talked already a lot with her about it, and that she told what the voices say, for instance. So that's an important first step, that you create the space where you can talk openly about it. If it's possible, I would really recommend to try and find if there's a peer support group, a hearing voices group, that she can talk with other voice hearers. But for you as a social worker, I think a genuine interest in her life story as well, and in her experiences with the voices, and you can actually map it out. That makes it easier for you to understand her, but maybe for her it makes it easier to get insight in her own experiences. And maybe you can look for patterns, like when are the voices to the background and when do they come to the foreground? When are they friendly and when are they negative? And often you can find, hey, maybe there's a handle for this is a good coping strategy. And that is maybe something that triggers things. So you can use that, and you can also use different tools that are available, also internationally, like the Maastricht interview that I talked about, and there's a lot of other information nowadays as well in different languages, also from this Hearing Voices movement. Is a worldwide movement now. So every country, lots of countries have their own network with information about coping with voices for voice hearers. But also information about mental health care workers, where they can find good ideas or trainings. Together look in this way, and maybe also try to relate with the voice itself, and not in a negative way. Of course, this lady is suffering of it, but if you're like together with her against the voice won't cooperate with you or with her, So if you can make a relationship with the voice as well, out of interest and respect, but also, if necessary, state clearly boundaries, this can help. And eventually, if you actually talk with the voice, like in this, it's called voice dialogue method, maybe that can bring about a change. But in general, for voice hearers in coping with voices, there's two main categories. There's one towards the voices, talking with them, mapping them, a diary, reading about it, talking about it. Other category is putting your attention to other things in life that are important to you, and maybe ways to create this emotional rest and calmness. And most of the time when people go do things with their talents and their passions, often the voices is like that. They either get silent or get positive. Yeah, and also work on maybe the self-confidence. That may be the underlying thing that the voice is pointing to. So a lot of positive feedback to her, yeah, and hopefully herself thinking positively about herself.
That's very nice advice. I just little additional question. We are a group working. How the other members don't have experience with voices, and sometimes it's weird for them. How could I normalize this in a group that doesn't have experiences?
That's a good question. For instance, you could tell about, let's see, I got a nice, oh, it's over there, nice slide about it. Like I said, hearing voices is very common, and you'll be surprised how many people hear voices. And now it's my work. I found out my neighbor hears voices, and my colleagues hear voices, and my grandmother heard voices as well. So a lot of people probably have some experience, but it's not an open subject to talk about. So creating this openness, maybe people will come forward. Either these people joining the group or your colleagues or other people. But there's also a lot of famous people who hear voices, and this can be really interesting. For instance, Lady Gaga, she heard voices, and in the beginning she started using a lot of drugs and drinking a lot of alcohol to try to suppress them. But later on she used it as inspiration for her fashion designs. So maybe this meat coat that she made, maybe it's an idea of the voices, I don't know. Vincent van Gogh is another example. He noticed that when he heard voices that said, you shouldn't paint, you cannot paint, you're not allowed. When he did paint, the voices would go away. So there's a lot of interesting stories. And in the Netherlands, I don't know if it's in Flanders or...
Yes, in Belgium, in Flanders.
We have this Dutch singer, Steen, S-Steen, you write it. She's a really young woman who only 5 years ago, she was in a mental hospital and hearing voices and self-mutilating, and she recovered amazingly quick, and she made a lot of music about it and had a lot of interviews about it and how she coped with that. And yeah, last year she was representing the Netherlands in the Eurovision Song Festival, singing for 190 million people, you know. So it's really, these stories can be interesting, but also less famous people, like Experts by Experience. Eleanor Longde has a really nice TED Talk that can be interesting. And there's in Dutch a lot of information by now from Stichting Weerklank, that's the Dutch stichting, and my own book. I didn't actually say that I've written a book, but my own book is for free on the internet as well, because we just want to inform people. So it has in all the aspects of hearing voices and how you can cope with it, how you can support people, what kinds of support is available. All in just common language, not, how do you call it? Biomedical language, for instance. And it's for free on the internet, and there's a lot of Dutch resources you can check out. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Jade.
Yes.
Any other question from the chat?
There's a few, but I'll start with this one. What main message do you have for us as future professionals?
Whoa, message. Good question. Keep on relating to people. They're not patients or clients, and maybe you meet the people in a period of their life they're experiencing a lot of problems, and you don't see maybe how they were before, or you don't see how they're going to be afterwards. And there can be a tunnel vision, you know. In psychiatry, tunnel vision is most of the time the diagnosis. That's a schizophrenic or an autistic person, you know. And then you really limited the view of what a person is. So, and you're probably well aware of that. One way we try to do it, let's see. Yeah, is to look at the person when they tell their story or their current life situation, to look at all areas of life and not have tunnel vision on the psychiatric or psychological problems or the problems with money that somebody experiences, but also look at their social world and their talents and passions, also their spirituality and giving meaning to things. So really connect with people, so you get the whole view. And if you look at all areas of life, you can find areas where there's a problem that's maybe related to other problems, that keeping things intact, but maybe there are sources of strength and support and inspiration as well on these other areas of life. And when you relate to a person, it's reciprocal, or it's a mutual exchange. So your attitude as a person, not as a social worker, as Jade or Robin, and share your ideas and experiences as well. And then you get a real connection and a relationship from which you can build on. So I think that's the main message.
Beautiful. This question is about medication. Do you feel psychiatric medication hinders the healing process?
Oh, that's a good question. I like healing process because that's a word that's hardly ever been used in psychiatry. Well, to be fair, it can have helping sides and not helping sides. So that's one thing. So it's always a search with the person, with the psychiatrist and other people involved. If there is a medicine that helps, and what dosage or what medicine helps. But the side effects are really serious. Even in small dosages, they can have really, either in your mental capacities, negative effects, or in your physical health. So this is a real problem. And for instance, with psychosis, what we are talking about, in Finland, there was somebody from Finland over here, I thought. They have developed open dialogue. This is a way of helping people in a psychotic crisis. And all they do is talk with everybody involved on the same table. There's nothing else. There's no medication. There's no different treatment planning, or it's just talking together, try to understand each other, and together decide what you're going to do. And this is one of the most effective results in the history of care in psychosis. And there is most of the time no or very little bit of medication there. And there is no forced psychiatry involved. So that's really interesting. Maybe, we can figure it ourselves out and support each other. Maybe that's the most effective way. But it can help for sure. Just like when you have a headache, an aspirin can help. Sometimes for me it helps. For instance, now I use my own antipsychotics in the lowest dosage to be able to sleep. But you always have to be aware of the side effects, and they are more severe than they used to say, and that the withdrawal effects as well. And the influence of the pharmaceutical industry is really big. The DSM, the Bible of psychiatry. About 3/4 of the people who wrote that book are connected to the pharmaceutical industry. So it biases the whole view towards a biomedical problem. While the reasoning behind it, I'm talking a lot, but I'm almost ready. 48 seconds over time already. But the idea was that there's a chemical disbalance in the brain. And for instance, for depression, it was with serotonin, and it's found out scientifically that it's not the effect. For hearing voices, it's dopamine, but they found out it's not the effect. That is the case. So they've been using a kind of false model to promote these medications. So that's something to think about as well, I think. I'm over time, I think.
No.
No?
15 minutes more.
Oh, 50?
Yeah, 15.
Let's go.
15, yes. Any more questions?
Yeah.
Could you throw the box, please?
Oh.
Thanks.
I want to ask, do you think that the LSD played a part in your
Sure.
psychosis? Or
Yeah.
that it would be triggered eventually because of your past?
Yeah, I really triggered these experiences. Personally, I don't like to the word psychosis, so most of the time I talk about a crisis, psychological or a spiritual crisis. But it's for sure, the LSD triggered these experiences. And now I think also, of course, these traumatic events in my childhood play an important role. And also, it was a bit of a stressful period in my life with trying to graduate from psychology. Which I wasn't able with these experiences. Yeah, and smoking weed daily maybe also gave a vulnerability. But sure, but then again, this LSD trip brought me at something inside me that wasn't, how do you call it, verwerkt. This whole thing that happened with my mother in my childhood, I didn't work it through yet, so it brought something to the surface. It showed me like, hey, there's some work to do inside yourself there. So, but it was definitely a trigger, and for some people, use of substances is a trigger. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Yes, please throw in.
Oh, that's fun, but anyway, I like the boss. I would like to know, like, in the recovery journey and everything, actually, you have said you have been hearing voices and very negatively wanting to suicide and such. And actually, it's difficult to get through all of those. And may I ask, what's your motivation, like, pedal you and trying to get well and get well and get well? Because I think for many people, they would just want to give up because it's quite torturing.
Yeah, and a lot of people kind of, especially from earlier generations, who've been like decades in psychiatry and they've been told that they're sick and they cannot do all kinds of things in life, they've come to believe it. It's maybe also a kind of self-stigma that came with it. For me, I really wanted to rebuild my life and do fun and meaningful stuff in my life again. And I didn't want ever to be in such a nasty psychological crisis and lose everything I got. So I think those were the two motivators for me. But nowadays it's also, I really want to help other people in their recovery journey, and that's really a motivation too. Yeah.
Thank you.
Nice. Any more questions? Yes.
And yeah. Woo!
Good catch.
Okay.
So also thank you for your story. I'm curious about, you said you played or make music or something.
Yeah.
In which way maybe art gave you meaning or helped a healing process or something? Because I'm a drama therapist in wording, so I'm curious how.
Very good question. Thank you very much. Yeah. Actually, we're doing a project now with the Hearing Voices groups about doing also non-verbal stuff with the group, because it's always talking about, and it's really helpful and interesting, but non-verbal ways, like creative ways or spiritual ways or with lifestyle things. A lot of the members of Voice Heroes, they have a lot of talents and they use it a lot in their life, and it also helps cope with the voices. So we are experimenting. Yesterday, the first hour we talked, and the second hour we made music. It was really fun, and it's really amazing how much talent there is. Almost every meeting of a course or a self-help group, we can start a band or we can make a play. So we are now in the self-help group experimenting with it, also with collage, with painting, with clay. Also with drama, we had a really nice session. And it really gives a different energy in the self-help group. But for me personally, music has been really helpful even though, you know, in my crisis time, I didn't play music anymore and I didn't listen to music anymore. Looking back, there was a missed chance, you know, because later on it helped me really a lot. When I play music or when I listen to music on my earphones, there's no room for the voices. So it used to be that when I was at the central station and people were walking around, in the sound of the people talking, I would hear voices instantly talking about me. But now I have my headset with my favorite music and I don't have that anymore. But on another level, I found out that many of my favorite musicians, and there's all kinds of styles, from metal and grunge to funk and soul and jazz and reggae, they have heard voices. It's known they talked about it, and a lot of them have written songs about it, like Eminem and Rihanna, The Monster, in which they sing, they learned how to live with their voices by becoming friends with them. And everybody may call him crazy, but if one person has something, can use this song in their own life, then it's good for him. That's really empowering song, you know. And I actually grew up listening to Suicidal Tendencies. It's like a punk hardcore metal band. And this singer is called Psycho Maiko. And he has a lot of songs about hearing voices, but also a lot of songs about not giving up and don't letting anyone get you down. So music for me has always been a source of, also empowerment, sometimes recognition in what they're singing about, that I recognize it. But also sometimes, you know, calm music more for soothing and relaxation and meditation. So music is my main thing, but I love all kinds of art and I love to try all kinds of things. And I'm really happy we're doing this project now. We already learned it throughout the years with the course, because every time people tell their own stories, it's in a really creative way. And many people are actually artists in their daily life as well. They put out records or books or, you know. And that really helps, you know, people are in their own strength, in their own passion and talent. And there's one guy I really like, Vincent Svierstra. He wrote a book about his experiences with voices and made a movie. But he's also a musician. And he heard negative voices all the time. You're worthless, you gotta kill yourself. But when he started making music, they say, yeah, you're good, you're gonna break through. Oh, we're a fan of yours, you know. So this way, it can also be a pointer, a direction pointer, you know. And also people who make music with their voices or hear music, you know. So for me, music is really inspiring, but all kinds of creativity, it actually helps people in their own personal recovery. And I think in creative therapy it can be really useful, but also in self-help groups. So we're trying to make a set of cards that a self-help group can use with ideas that you can do, verbally or non-verbally, creative or otherwise, and make a little handbook with it. So it's not creative therapy, but like an exercise or an idea that you can do together. Yeah. So, but
one more question?
But there's also a question online, I thought. Or
yeah, we'll do both.
Okay.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
You told us that the voices are more likely to come back when you relax. Does that make it harder for you to relax or cause you to avoid relaxing? To just keep focusing?
Yeah, and it can be really a vicious circle. For a lot of people, voices can keep them up at night as well, that you can't sleep because you can't relax, because the voices, they trigger stressful emotions. And the voices and the stress keep you awake, but on the next day, you know, sleep deprivation on its own can cause voice hearing. And it makes you extra vulnerable to stress. So I have a slide for that as well. I'd like to share. So that's a really powerful thing to find out what your vicious circle is. Because many times these vicious circles, they keep the problems intact or they worsen it like a downward spiral. And when you're up to here in the stress with the voices, you don't have much space or time to calmly think, how shall I cope with these voices? Or how shall I understand it? Maybe it's easier to try reduce the stress first and try to get a couple of days of sleep, and then there's maybe the voices are already quieter or friendlier, but anyway you're more in your strength, and there's more calm to think about how to cope with the voices. So yeah, for many people it's like that. Oh, wait, yeah. Yeah, so like this, but the voices doesn't have to be negative. When they evoke these negative emotions, it's really nasty, but it can also be if you manage to really relax and get to emotional calm, that the voices also become calm. There's this guy in our Hearing Voices group. He had a really impressive story with years living on the street and with in psychiatry and suicide attempts. But he also was with Osho back in the 70s, and he learned how to meditate. And every day he spent 6 hours in his room, laying on his bed, and it's his meditation to activate his chakra, and then it's all quiet and he feels good. And in the beginning, the mental health care workers around it were worried, hey, you should be activated, you should do things, you know. But I was really impressed that he found a way on himself, on his own strength, to find emotional calm and silence inside. So sometimes, yeah, if you manage to find the calm, it can also be that the voice become friendly or become silent. Or some people are positive voices that help people calm down. So if you hear voices, if you know somebody hears voices, you don't know much, you don't know anything actually. You have to, together with that person, find out what these experiences are like and what helps and what doesn't.
Thank you.
Thank you.
One last question from the chat. Jade.
Yes, so you spoke a bit about this already, but I think it would be a good question. How can we as professionals build trust with affected clients in order to create a working alliance?
Can you repeat the last part, please?
So, how to build trust with your clients in order to create a working alliance?
Yeah. Well, for me, it would be even better if it's not a working alliance, it's a human relationship.
Yeah.
So that's the most important thing, you as a person and not as much as a mental health care worker. Yeah, and look at the whole person, and also in recovery it's really important that you follow the lead of the person, what the person needs and wants, and not what all kinds of protocols or say what's the best to do. So don't decide for the person, let the person decide as much as possible, and see the different sides of the person, also these qualities and strengths you can build on, and give positive feedback on it. Tell them that you see, oh, you're actually a sensitive person, or you're a friendly person, or also talk about what their wishes used to be. Maybe they're in the refrigerator and you have to get them out and wake the dreams up again, you know? And let's see how we can realize that. So, yeah, I like the strengths-based approach. Maybe you are aware of it, so look at person's strengths and sources of support and follow the lead of the person. Yeah.
Perfect, beautiful.
May I have a big hand for this great man?